With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness of my mind's confusion. Grant me the light of self-assured intelligence, that I may see into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Enthused by great compassion, you expounded the sublime truth. In order to eliminate all wrong views, to you, the Gautama Buddha, I pay homage. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings.
The subject Sumba Ch, the Sumba Tameba Gewachima Samjevi Sushavas.
The third section, which is explanation of how an ordinary being has all the causes to connect with a subsequent similar type.
The subject Niva Kabla, Tamebe Gewachim, Tamilba and Chisim Tamadi, some Mijurvi Gumze, and Doji Gulu the Chevis, that the Tinsi Chada Gabi Wanta. Tadipa Gach and Ranglula Gewachim Ribuchima Samjur. That's Samjurba and Samjur Gukari is the Guso Kari is this year.
So after having shown why the reasons given by the others are not valid, and then therefore that there will be a continuation of the mind, then here Acharya Dharmakirti is presenting his own position of what that cause is that makes the mind connect with a later one.
That's our change. Dala Chakwa Tangdembe, Simjin Shingi team member, Deduk Tortup Debena, Membeneni Yonsule, Dungi Chinji Loloda, Sekwakuni Chungwani, Kijukana Temeba, Tenikewa Miguros.
So the root verses are by having attachment to self without being led by others, if one desires to gain happiness and abandon suffering, a low status is taken. Wrong perception of suffering and tightly bound desire are causes of birth. For one without them, there will be no birth.
Dreba Tamilba, Dala Chakwa the Dembe, Simjin Shingi Tiwa member, Dewa Toba Dang, Dunge, Dorwa, Debe, Sambe, Membene Yonsulemba Yins.
So the commentary is, since ordinary beings possess attachment to self, the desire to gain happiness and abandon suffering that is not induced by someone else makes them take a low status.
That di nenga chumbujik chagiyore. Takewa chima tu shishikandar, Ribochima Tsam Jordoegi, Gudi Kariris Lavaina, Ani Ngaransu Gula, Dewa Tomdugi, Ani Chakwajigna, Dunga the Tundugi, Ani Dubachi Yores, Takan the Dewa Tober Dubachida, Dunga Toron Dubi, Ani Dubachi Yores, Ani Dubati Wangi, Ningatu Shije, Gawalingi Yores, Tadisungi.
So this section is particularly important because it explains how as long as you have, or there is this desire, which is a desire to gain happiness or a desire to get rid of suffering, which then, as long as there is this desire that is for one of these two things, as a result of this desire, one will take birth again.
Simjin Shingi team members Layadigi, and Ganzu Gewadu Slembadi, Shingi Devongi, Ngadu Chigi Omaris, Takan the Shingi can do Shiganzola Rame Botone, dus ani kewa dus lenchuwe de chigi yo mares ta shengi kanjina soso rangi ani deba thon chigi yores odedis segorta.
So, where it says without being led by others, what it means is that when this desire arises and as a result of it one takes birth again, this taking birth is not kind of forced upon us by someone else. It's not that we're being led in that direction by someone else. That desire that we have is not induced by someone else. What it is instead is that we ourselves have this desire, and then our own desire is what leads us to these kind of lower states.
Ta rangi debe wangi lengi yores labdi deba di kewa chima lu langi deba tanda tak yu khawala chimba yina yu thela susu doye deba di wangi skeje shigi yo mare rangi deba se deba di khaga shigi yore.
So here where it says desire, it's led by desire because it's identifying desire as the cause for taking birth. The desire that is being referred to over here is not a desire that actively knows or is choosing where one wants to go and choosing what one wants to be like. It's not that kind of desire, it's a different kind of desire.
Tanda deba di khare lamna deba di dewa thobor deba dungen dorwa deba dir.
So the kind of desire that is being spoken of here, not being one of these, not being a desire like aimed at or directed at a certain object or a certain place, the desire here that is being spoken of as the cause that makes one take birth again is a desire to be happy and a desire to not suffer.
Tabbe chashavina ani kerangi legajik chende me wala mishimbaji legajik kurshe. Tabbe na keran tiri 소강디 장모수에게 내가 캐나를 다스 내가 듣고 이내 수수 내가 지 제기 되바 매워시 좋아 다 되바 매워 인도 가나 계란기 내가 지 지기로 당 가지고 되바 메신도 내가 제 여러 봐 되바 메신도 내가 제 용도 다 이지 계란 내가 지 마치나 아니 계란기 내가 계란기 때 두디도 마소나 디 딱다 마쳐 봐 인도 계란을 니제디 포그레스 계제 셔와 소자 딸래가 니제 포그레스 라비데 니제 텔라 직신 짜네 딘데기 둥에디 미드니 그런 레가디 치고다 다 홉칼랑 아주 계제 셔인데 nga 레가디 제 되바 메신도 제 죽송 라이즈 여르데 레가디 제 용디 결혼을 되바 여 가리 되바 여르나 레가디 제기 되바 여 말데 레가디 마치나 둥을 용에기 니시디 결혼 되게 매바 이데 디 둥이 미드 되바 디기 결혼 제 주고요.
So for example, if there's something that you don't want to do or that you have no desire to do, for instance, if someone says, today it's your job to clean the hall, and you don't have any wish to do it, you have no desire to clean the hall, but you know that if you don't do it, there's like a punishment or there's a fine or something that makes you, that then you'll have to deal with that later. So even though you might not have the wish or the desire to clean the hall, you do have a desire not to incur that fine or whatever it is that will happen if you were not to do it. And so even though what we say when we say it is, oh, I didn't want to clean the hall, but I had to do it anyway, even though it looks like cleaning the hall did not happen through a desire to clean it or tidy it up, there is a desire that was a motivating factor that made you do it. It wasn't a desire to clean the hall, but it was a desire not to face the consequences of not cleaning it, which was whatever punishment or whatever fine might come. And therefore that desire not to suffer from the consequences of the fine made one clean the hall. So there is still a motivating factor that is desire, even if it's not directed at the thing one is doing.
야 드링크랑 소강디 장마수에 레가디 수치기 임바이나 마치는 예제 요스케저 말라버체 드리 소강디 수 장마수기 임바 수 장마수기 나 콜라 보너스 포인트 요레스 냠바 토와지 티기스 라바이나 레가디 체기 데바 메나야 딘디기 야 데와텔랑감체 디기야 미두신도야 제디 용구요.
Alternatively, you might still not wish to clean the hall, but instead of there being a sort of fine or a punishment for not doing it, if instead of this kind of result we say there is a prize or there is some sort of advantage for cleaning it, even if you don't want to do it, in the immediacy you might not want to do the thing that you were doing, so you might not have desire towards that thing, but with a higher state of some sort of benefit that you have in mind, you can still engage in an action that you don't want to do. Even in that case, it's still propelled by desire.
So dilabdita debanidwa chawa khari la jugi ina chawa di khorang la cheyagi deba yumi chik. Ani ya chawa dila deba mena ya deba meshindu chawa dila juge thela ya mena dungi midwe che. Dungi chik la jik de midwe ne jugde ya. Ya mena dewa chik la ngam che, dewa chik la dewe che, ani jugde ya.
So there's two kinds of ways in which desire propels you to do something. One is where you actually desire the thing that you're doing itself. And then in a case where you don't desire the thing that you're doing, there is a desire in the background that is either a desire to not face the consequences of not doing that, which then kind of pushes you to do it, or even though you might not desire the thing itself, doing the thing itself, or performing that action, you know that there is a higher result or a higher benefit that comes later, which then again propels you or makes you do something, even though you might not desire it. So wanting to do it and then not wanting to do it, but even when you don't want to do it, there can be these two ways in which desire still indirectly impels you to do something. So whatever we do, whatever actions we do, and like worldly, whenever in anything we do in this world, it's pushed by or it's kind of sustained by one of these two. There's nothing that we do that's not driven or motivated by this. So the real kind of like the determining factor in all of this, the one that makes one do this, is the wish to be happy and the wish to be free from unhappiness or from suffering.
간다 대화 첨부 가주지 라바 이나 촉심에 대바 다동 대화 고두 세대기 되바 대다 둥이 춘준지 이나 딱 간다 가 고구 메스 랍대기 되바 딩이부 디기 아주 상황도 치는 죽디기였다 내가 제디고다.
So without having to think of some sort of very elevated things such as liberation or the joy of liberation, just a very ordinary way of understanding it is how it actually works, which is whatever we do, even if it's not a great state of happiness or it's not a very kind of heightened state of happiness or joy, even for a very small kind of temporary, minute, fleeting moment of happiness, we do engage in things. Similarly, whatever else we might do, even if it's not trying to escape or run away from some enormous state of overbearing pain, even with the smallest kind of unpleasantness that might arise, we react and then we try and do things to avoid that. So attaining even a small, very fleeting moment of happiness, or even trying to get away from a small moment of discomfort, whatever we do is driven either by one or the other. So whatever actions we perform are powered by or are induced by this kind of wish or this desire.
Das suzugi semnala dewa deba teda 아니 디기체도 유텔의 주행이 부디 틈바이나 배나 유텔의 주객이 되바야 대화되로 대화되로 디기 굴마치 땅지 죽 아니 유텔라야 수수 랑경원의 주객이 되바니 냠도 소바이나 하는 가지고 깔렉하기요 깔리 출기요 말이.
So if we have a wish to be happy, and then the thing that is giving us, or the action we have to do to attain this happiness, if that action also is something that we find pleasant or pleasurable, then there's no discomfort or there's no fatigue, one doesn't get tired in doing that. Did you understand this? So if I have a wish to be happy, and then there's an action that I have to perform to do that, and that action also makes me happy. So if these two things come together, then it's easy for me to do it. Whereas if we have the wish to be happy, but then the thing that we have to engage in, that action of engaging in it does not make us happy. So we have a wish to be happy. To attain that, we have to engage in something, but engaging with that thing itself doesn't induce or doesn't make one happy. Then having to constantly perform that action and the wish to be happy, they don't reconcile as well as in the first case, and then that becomes increasingly difficult to sustain that.
So namju soso du jundu da chede yimba yindu an tika gores la yindu tela diga ski deba yomarta tela deba dile mato dewa de ina ye dewa de na dewa de gona di chegu yo de thong ina tela deba di takta yago chile mato na ani ngazo kale khabu chene dibong giru chede kale khabu chene da ngazo yung de so da che kale khabu shu
so when we often find ourselves saying, or we hear, it's very difficult to practice. The reason why it's difficult to practice is because it falls within the second category, where what we want is to be happy, but then the things that we have to do, we've seen that we have to engage in certain things or perform certain actions that will make us or lead us to the state of happiness. But the things that we have to do are very contrary to our normal way of doing things or our normal way of acting. So when we hear or we understand that we should abstain from non-virtuous actions or engage in accumulating virtue, abstaining from or not doing, engaging in non-virtuous actions is very contrary to our normal way of being. And because our normal way of being spontaneously is kind of flows in the direction of performing non-virtuous deeds, abstaining from them and cultivating a different attitude or cultivating a different set of habits becomes increasingly difficult, because that's not something that we feel naturally disposed to. But the reason we do it is because we see that, assuming that we see that we have a larger happiness in mind, then to do that, we have to do things that we don't like doing in the immediacy of them. And so then we say it's difficult or hard to practice.
That bena nambusangi bi chö nyamlen gal keje she yungde an dewa dewa ina an dalyo tongores keje di she roda ta dalyo tong dewa di ngazul yo marta an dewa dego ore dalyo tong dewa dego yo mare so that dalyo matuna dewa yungu mare se dewa me shindu uzu gyapshi dalyo tong bezin shigi yudu an kalekha u chorde ta di kalekha u shore sha se.
So from the Buddhist point of view, if you want to be happy, it says that you need to abandon the self. And when it says you need to abandon the self, abandoning the self is not something that any of us want to do at all. And so you have to be happy. If this is the aim, and the Buddhist path is saying you have to abandon the self, the thing that we're doing would be abandoning the self, which no one likes to do. No one wants to do this. And so abandoning the self becomes tedious and difficult and challenging and unpleasant. And that's why we say it's difficult or unpleasant to do it. So what's important to know at the end of it all is that whatever we do is driven by this desire.
So that devewangi chigi on the hakore and devewangi chele debadi you did the teaching deba pama shabache 대화 통제도 되고 대화 통제도 동연 동되기 되바시도 어디기 치고.
So and then the desire that we're saying, which is kind of like the motivating factor for us to do things, is not the desire that wishes to do the action or attain the thing that it's engaging in that immediacy. This is important to understand. So the desire that we're speaking about is the general kind of desire in the background that wishes to attain happiness and be free from suffering, and then this acts as a motivating factor to do whatever we do.
So that mingi yore 미직 내가 shara 맞아 가지고 가디는 예딩이 지금 미직 shara 많이 봐시 두주 통도 보도 많이 봐시 두주 막 내가 지금 코라니가 더버 뒤온 게 지금.
So whether there's someone who's lazy and just lying around all day, and there's another person who instead of doing that is using whatever small instance or small gaps of time that they have free to do a whole bunch of things. Both of them are driven equally by desire to do whatever they're doing.
So that 예딩에 대한 대화 등으로 다가랑이 해주고.
The person who's sleeping is also sleeping driven by or motivated by this wish to be happy and not suffer. It's the same.
So that 코랑이 삼려 나올라. 탄 예샤네 키워도 서고 대화 막아도 삼nye 되고.
So their thought is probably or is, if I sleep, it's a lot more pleasant, and if I sleep, I'll be happy and I will not have to undergo suffering or pain, so I'll just sleep.
탑 싫어 만약에 되게 두저 주제 가시면 만약에 되게 얘는 처음인데 제거도 쟤는 바가 대화라고 써버려.
The other one who's always busy has an opposite thought saying there's no purpose or there's no use in sleeping, it's a waste of time, I need to do something to be happy, and therefore the drive is the same, the motivating factor is exactly the same.
다 대화 용어의 메타 코란이 가가가 배제체로 모두 뮤직 거다.
So the means that they use to be happy are different, what they do, but the aim is exactly the same in both cases.
So the 인도 땅 가서 대 사자소스 가와 가산 델레라 데베 왕길레.
So all of you who've come here from wherever you have, you all come here driven by desire.
아니 녜데 두지스탄 캐나설 시고라 대니 데베 왕길.
And my wish to be here and explain this to you is also motivated by desire.
당이 데바 가리요래. 니직 시에지 캐나설로 직 페나 디기 소놈 소로 싸고 디기야. 나라나야 탈바 탐지심이 대화도 그래. 사실 대화 드려질 위시에 되고.
So my wish or my desire is, if I can say something that is helpful, then I will accumulate a lot of merit, and through this merit, I will be able to get closer to liberation and Buddhahood.
다 든들에 다 상마 어디 제리고 왔다.
So this is how it is. Everything that happens, everything that we do is one of these two.
디인디 다 대화 등의 미디로 디 여친제라 아니 계랑라 다 간다 속에 내주고 맞다. 무트윈이 가린 제주다.
So as long as you have this, the wish to be happy and the wish or the desire to gain happiness and the desire to get rid of suffering, it doesn't let you sit still. You'll always be doing something. It's always going to drive one to do something.
디인디 아주 리바 찌기질 삼로 맨다단 무튼도 스도디아디 데바되기 제주고요.
Which is why then the mind, when it just keeps moving on from one thing to another thing, doing one thing, engaging in one thing, apprehending one thing, and then continues to do this drive or the push that the mind gets to carry on doing things is driven by desire.
다 데바디 여친제라 아니 셈을 예소요 말다. 셈 내가 제대로다. 예소요 말. 셈 무튼 내가 제대로.
So as long as there's this desire, there's no moment for the mind to have rest. There's no rest that the mind can have. The mind is constantly going to be propelled to do one thing or another thing. It never has rest. It never rests.
손자 아니 배기 라마 첨부지 기름이딩이 라마 첨부지 고랑이데 쏘머다. 맞아 수부 니마 딱 봐서 내가 그거는 깔래카기로 봐. 특히 수부 깔래카면 내서 야구에서 레저로 봐. 어디 나신지 고랑이다. 셈딜 딘딜 내가 뭐 그거지 단다보도 주딜 딱 깔래카면 셈에서 얘기 멤버스 공디 깨지지 로지요다.
So there's an extremely realized, learned and realized. So a Pandit and a Siddha, a Tibetan Lama, who used to ask, he said, in the same way that your body keeps moving and is constantly engaged in things, don't you get tired? Don't you get physically tired? He would say, your mind that's constantly running and it's constantly doing stuff, doesn't it get tired? Don't you want to rest?
다 단다보도 망부진 가져라. 데버들 인조해진 로딩이라고 지었다. 갈릭하게 잡로 인정.
So most of us, we have so far had favorable outcomes as a result of being driven and pushed by this desire. We haven't really gotten to a state where it's exhausting us yet.
다 참참라 되버 되게 깨지지 안 지부 consequences 레로 신앙 차고 늘레인데 아니 디디디 탕치에 넘버로 땅이 가르쳐고나 세 땅에서 야오면로 색삼 코로제 드즈질리 거다.
But sometimes when this desire drives us to do things and then we don't receive the result that we expected, so we're not as happy as we thought we would be, and we have unwanted consequences, then in those moments we sometimes feel like we need to rest. So there are those rare moments where our desire takes us in directions that are unwanted, and then in those moments we have every now and then this idea or this wish to say, I would like some rest. You feel fatigued.
야 딘디기 강에디 마자스나 야랑자 되버.
But if that difficulty or that obstacle goes away, and come back to the same state, and then it's back, and then you're getting what you want, and then you're back on that train.
다 괜히 이제 단답아도 찍질 디 사회질에 디치 얘기 되고 디 사회질에 디치 얘기 되고 디치 다 되버 줘야 고르면 있게 되구나.
So since we've been born up until now, that's just been it. That's just been the state. That's the status quo. It's just one thing after another thing after another thing after another thing after another thing. And when you get it, there's another one that you want to latch onto, and then another one, and then another one.
소저도 코로나로 둥이 치슈 가리레스 계제직 대용도 아니 코로나기 둥이 치슈디 몸범이 대화들에서 가리직 대화직 토바 이나야 되바디 멋진 버지 연결 되바게 돼. 따디 둥이 코로에 나는 둥이 치슈직들에서 좀는디 또 나로 송여로.
So in the sutras, the Buddha says, what is the biggest form of suffering, or what is the most strong kind of suffering in samsara? And the Buddha says the strongest form of suffering in samsara is never being satiated or satisfied or content. And whenever you get what you want, inadvertently, you just want more. And so because you're never satiated, you're never satisfied, that leads to a constant wish or desire to do more, to want more. And so Buddha says this is the strongest form of suffering that is there in samsara.
So that nazaro cheba ina lugi nazasoro cheba pedo jaj cheba ina ta dili naza cheba yo mares ta traizan me yo nazasoro ta 가주 다 가주 나자지는 콜 면땅 거봐 맨 가주 땅 cheba ina nazade hung mutuni pel digi ina ta dili naza cheji yo mares labna shin cheje debajikke debadi drubechedo lagache ya lagadi chedi yan debaki 양 되버 싸워지게 양 디치도 내가지 딱 가서 코랑이 된다디 주베시도 가지 제샤나야 코 무튼 다도 되버게 시리데 소야면도 보다 디인데다 딜린 니chen 강식이었어 지가 지제지나 디송요 싸워 지강지나.
So using an example of like a physical disease, there's no disease that could be worse if there were to be a disease where whatever treatment you give it to fix it, that just perpetuates the disease and makes it get stronger and stronger and stronger. So if there was a physical disease that with each treatment just gets progressively stronger, there would be nothing worse than that physical disease. Similarly, desire, if it's there or when it's there, whatever you do to satisfy that desire never really satisfies it, but it always increases, and it always there's a new thing that you wish for, and then later there's a new thing that you wish for. So there isn't anything worse than desire, because whatever you do to try and remedy it or to satisfy it actually just perpetuates it and keeps it going further and further. So the words in the sutra, there's no bigger fault in samsara, or there's no bigger defect in samsara than desire.
니 ngoshinba lagachinge 어저데 나를 lagachinge 용무들도 여러 번 lagachinge 딘데지 기를 그런 미상지 나를 lagache 렌 나와 가시절로 그 된치시야 엔젤가 투소 이 키랑파기랑 자 유에스 매가 된산이사 렌이 나와니 숨어도 누구 말 이 가진 된산이슬라 기우민데 왜 가진 된산이슬라도 내가 가져 전에 꾸고도서
So there was a lady who was working in our house, And after a few months of being there, she left. So I met her after a few months that she had already come. And then when I asked her, I said, "Are you still working here?" And she said, "No." And I asked, "Why? Were you not happy?" She said, "No, it's not that. But whatever I did, there was more work to be done. Every time I did something, there was more work that was required to be done. So I left."
소소 진다디기 내가 가져 시시는 진다디기 양게 내가 구구두스 탕치네 그 다니스는 되었다.
So whatever work I was being asked to do, as soon as I did it, there was more work on top of that had to be done. And then whenever that got completed, there was more work that had to be done. And I just got exhausted, so I left. That's what she said.
다 지부지서래. 대바디기 간조 내가 구고 내가 가져 제시는 그 양게 구구였다.
So desire is kind of the same thing. Whatever desire forces us to do, or whatever desire drives us to do, when we do that, then desire comes back in and drives us to do something else. And then that same thing just keeps carrying on.
땅 원하시는 간조 당기 디 진다디 용조 나신 간조 디 용조 거도.
So like she quit her job and leaving the person behind, her employer behind, we should do the same thing. We should leave desire behind and quit it.
선자 녀모 두첸인데 요르 두첸인데 지금 마신도 스테딩에 서로 인케라 지 간된 게 서로 개책임면도 지간 책임면도 변에 시발라 서로 요로다 드리진 지금면 베스다 그런데 막 개책오면서 강 예소견데요서 디송고요.
So there's these stories of these Mahasiddhas, such as Shantideva, the Bodhisattva Shantideva, who, if you see them from their outward expression, they would not do anything. They would not recite any text, they would not do any prayers, they would not engage in any activity. And when they were asked, "Don't you do anything? Like, aren't you doing anything, accumulating virtue? What about some practice, some merit?" They said, "No, I don't do anything. I'm resting."
다 딜랍이온데 로 멤버 속에 아다고 내가 징에 맞는 게서 유규탐 것도 스테이드레스 사모코거와 내가 신경 두지기 내가 신경지기 라선 지워 당고로다 지워 당시 아니 걔랑 셈미소 간디 스텝이도 지워 당이도 아니 셈미소 대기 남과도 땜버와
So when Bodhisattva Shantideva, he said this, people who didn't understand what he meant or what it meant, they just assumed that he was lazy and he didn't want to do anything. So they kind of had like a bad idea about it. Those, however, who understood what he said, they asked him, they said, "How have you found rest for your mind? What have you done?" At which point then Shantideva taught the method for gaining rest for the mind.
당가서 예소 겸나 예소 겹서 가와 잡다 예소 겹서 찍모도 요말 디 춘이다 춘이 인강도 예소 탭나 탭르마도 춘이강도 데트나 예소 탭기르마도 შემ방 예소 겹서 메스다 예소 겹서 사자 შემ방 요말다.
So if we have to get rest or we have to find rest, there has to be somewhere where we find rest. And the only place where you can find rest is dharmata, or like the nature of things, the reality or the nature of things. That's the only place where you can find rest. So if you reach that place and you find rest in that, then you can get rest. Anywhere else is a place where you will not find rest. That's the only place the mind can find rest.
예소 겹서데 가와 고고 요르라나 데바마케 사지들 예소 탭겠다 디강라 데소나 아니가 셈날 데바킹 민두 세디 데바 가드에 중구도나 텔링 예소 립기다.
So the place where you find rest is going to have to be a place where desire does not flow towards. If there is a base for desire to latch on to or to then flow towards, then that will not be a sufficient or a stable base for one to get rest. So the base for where you find rest, or a place where you find rest, has to be a place where you have no desire, which removes desire.
So that 데바마 시제 예소 탭사디 사자디 사자세고로 네디 지금도 요말 추기인 동니디마도 요말 데인데 아니 아주 슝기 빼제도 넘노라 추기인소 예소 차스.
And so the only place where desire just dissolves or vanishes is when you are resting in emptiness, or when you're resting in the nature of things. Which is why in the texts it says, in the realm or in the sphere of dharmata, find rest. That's the words that are used, because that's the only place where you find it, which desire dissolves into.
손자다 나고상게 비추인 냠는 생기지 나로라다 동문이디 가가서 개춘부 이메디 어디르다.
So if you understand or you are wondering about the relevance of emptiness or knowing the nature of things in the teachings of the Buddha, this is why it's so important. This is why it takes so much, it's center stage.
다 추기 인걸 녀서 태발라 추기 인다 추기 인걸 대고디 추기 인생거와 디인디 고 마자라냐로와 디네가 개천부지 차디기디 다디 로지멜 없생거 가죠.
So if that's the only place you can find rest, then in that sphere of emptiness or in that realm of dharmata, you need to understand at least what it is. So you need to know what it is if that's where you're going to find rest, which is why that's what we do next year.
So that tanda dibodu tiksoa ta ngajo debewangi dugi chigi yorda sta mission bashira khage same yusoroshi debewangi chigi yore seti.
So is that okay? Like what we're doing is driven by desire, not someone else. No, we're not being forced by anyone or anything else to do it. It's our own desire that's making us do it.
But kadu 들은 것도 제대로 야에도 돼서 여러 해임 뭐 걔는 제주인 말은 것도 제대로 야가지고 그러다.
So we do argue with other people saying you made me do it or you forced me to do it.
이네 파주되게 아이디어를 마도 제한원에도 그런 게 되듯이 그러다. So
actually what happened is the other person just kind of gave you some sort of stimulus or an idea to do it, but the actual doing was driven by your own desire.
뒤로다 조국의 인플루언스 가려나 뒤로다 제주에서 그 지체고를 야구 열을 라들마도 타마타마디 수수기를 더버게고 그 가져만 가져라는 수수기 더버마게나 더버메나 궁금하다.
This is how people influence you. They say a whole host of things or they say a whole variety of different things. But all these things that they tell you, if they're not attractive to you, you're not driven by desire to do them, or you have no wish for them, then it doesn't really matter. They can endlessly go on saying things and kind of give you all these different ideas, but you won't be driven by them. So hearing from other people is not the real cause for them for going astray or being led astray. It's your own desire that does it.
다 티원이버들 다 티워지 가리려고 하나 다 오늘 딘디기 더바디 간일레고 왔다 대화도에기 더바다 둥이 미도에기 더바디 간일레브레 슬랍디 자와 치간 탕보디 달라 차고 탕데베스 달라 차베 차고디요 선선 차고 디원기 더바디 기기요레 스타딜라르다.
So then the question that comes naturally is, well, why do we have this, or where does this kind of desire stem from? And in the first line, that's what it says. It says, this desire comes about by having attachment to self.
소자 달라 차고 메나 아니 달라 대화 토백이 체도 내가 지금 말해 다 둥에도 체외 체도 내가 지금 말해 다 대화 토백이 체도 내가 지체 다 둥에도 체외 체도 내가 지기 여봐인데 디기 가랬다 된 거래 내가 지해디 달라 차고 디원기 지거다.
So if there was no attachment to self or to oneself, then there would be no wish for oneself to be happy, to gain happiness, or for oneself to get rid of suffering. But because we have the wish for oneself to be happy and for oneself to be freed from suffering, these two things that we have are signs, or they indicate that we have a starting attachment to the self that then manifests in the wish not for oneself to be face suffering or pain, and for oneself to have happiness.
다 시행기체도 제나 아니 시행대로 차고 여비 켜봐요 말이에요.
Whereas if you do something for others, there is no pervasion, or it's not necessary that is accompanied with a state of attachment. So when it's more driven or when it's directed at others, the desire for them to be happy or the desire towards others, that can be, it has a positive aspect to it and it has a negative aspect to it. So, for instance, an ordinary example is when there's elections and these ministers, they want to get elected. And they want to get elected into whatever seats they want to get elected into. When it comes time for the elections, they have to go in the midst of the public or the population to go and do whatever they have to do to get these votes.
다 뒤지 자와 가르치기래 콘솔라 사야동에 대해서도 응이 대해서도 콘솔다 코란적이 딘적이 대화다 등의 주에게 자와직 지기도 와.
So then when they get out into the public, the things that they do things for others so that the others can be happy and that the others' suffering can be uplifted or they can have some respite from their suffering. So they give them food, they give them gifts, they give them blankets, they do all that.
다디 파죽 강라 제사게 유교우 딘졸라 오늘 거란게 차과 유연에 거디 지기요래 콜라 차체 아니 거기 대화 주에도 동에서 지기요래서는 말해 거란게 대화 주에도 동에서 얘기치도 디지기요래.
So over here in this case, do they have attachment to the people who they are doing these actions to, or who the actions are directed to? And they have no attachment to those people to whom the actions are directed. The attachment is to oneself, and the things that they're doing is for one's own benefit or for the benefit of one's own happiness or to not suffer later.
So that 오늘 거란게 유텔라 차네 대화 주에도 동에서 해체나 election ki tuzu chibu di mo ba khadin di koran khogab namjung la kogi lega de chigiru.
Whereas if it was genuine attachment towards the people who these actions were directed to, then they would have to keep the sign that it is genuine attachment would manifest by them repeatedly doing it even after they have been elected and they're in power. Whenever they had the occasion, they would be doing that. If it was genuinely attachment directed at them.
다다나신 파마기 부고라 차 부고기 파마라 차 간다 단다 차라데 디나라 남주 명시에 제와디엔 디나라 레주고 되나 차과래.
So when we say parents have attachment towards their children or children have attachment towards their parents, we're using the word attachment, and in this concept of attachment we can even put what we commonly call love. Because what we commonly consider love towards one another is included and is just another manifestation or another form of this attachment.
So that dindegi yutela rangli shembe shendela pama bugu pingya gigen suyo chogbo chong suyo ba inaya gangla chakwa di ketuna khuyege ani dewado dunge sete kala samlo letweji dil chakwa digi ani samlo thang yungure samlo de thang yunde ani khuyege what to be ada dunge sela action chejung mebaji khali ledeji.
So if you have attachment towards others, whether it's a parent, a relative, a sibling, a friend, a teacher, whoever it might be, if you have this attachment towards them, or you cultivate attachment towards them, what eventually becomes important, or what starts to happen, is that the concern for their being happy and the concern for them not suffering happens very naturally. It's like a byproduct of having attachment towards them. And then when you have this attachment towards them, because this becomes a natural wish, this wish then doesn't allow you to sit still, and you find yourself doing things to ensure that they can be happy and that they can be free from difficulty.
Ta khangla chakwa ke matusa yutela simjentela and kwegi dewa do dungedela ngazu nangmi loke rure ti yindu ani kwegi dewa drueda dunge se samlo da pasha an tadung kola dunge jela soba ta dewa shen drube chi du kola dunge chungba ina kola dunge sogugo ina ya an keyo marise ta nangmi yungurta.
If there is someone, or if this state of attachment doesn't naturally arise towards someone, and we don't have this attachment directed at someone else, then that person for whom we don't have attachment, they become insignificant or they become irrelevant. And because they are irrelevant, not only do we not do anything or wish for them to be well and wish for them not to suffer, but that state of irrelevance or lack of concern for them leaves space for actually being or directing ill will towards them and saying, I wish they suffer, or I wish they had like I wish they had a hard time and I wish they were not happy. So when there's no attachment towards someone, it leaves space for this, and then it can allow for these other states or these other wish thoughts to come.
아직 로 상마라 닝지게 오래 자와게 오래라나 칸데 또 자와도 닝지 당일 배제 체연데 기게 오래 세도가라 식도 슬로 나로라 다 직대식 랍상코나 엑셉 진모투미서로 직데 소화질래 돼야지 다 디기 잡라 도 탐질 닝지게 오래 자와게 오래서 말아버지 계란한다 차니 차기도 왔어 파마 빙게 조보니 차고 기기도 왔어 다 차고 깨셔로 상말로 차고 깨스다 상말로 차고 진좀 깨셔나 야부도 왔어 로 깨셔면 디기도 왔어 라베나 식디 차고 식디 배제 셔샤바이나 디 남균이 깨대지로 차고디 남균 깨대 닝제 라베 남균 깨대게 메바치고 술도 깔레긴 두고고 서로 손자 닝지 식디 배제 셔가 삽라 닝지 곰고레세 삽들라 그냥 차고 곰스 심지어 탐절 차고 곰스 라베이나 로르tis jubudoshi maraldir sonashto.
So generally when we speak in these contexts, especially in the things that we hear and we're told, we say you should have compassion for all beings, or you should have love towards all sentient beings. And when you use these terms, compassion and love, they sound like this greater than life, kind of very altruistic, very unattainable, very holy kind of idea that sounds very distant and far because we don't have them right now. And so because we don't have them, they seem like these kind of goals that are very, very elevated or very high goals, lofty goals to attain, but they seem very unrelated to us because we can't do them, or we'd have to like make this enormous effort to engage in them. Whereas if you just switch the word and you say, you know, just increase your attachment and direct it to everybody. The attachment that you currently have is already directed at people who are close to you, who you know, who we consider our circle. And so because we already have that attachment, if you just switch the word from compassion and love and all of these very kind of flowery terms, and you just say, take attachment and direct it to everybody equally, because that's something that we experience already, I personally feel that if you just switch the word around and you just say, well, have attachment towards everyone, it has a much stronger impact, or it also is very immediately relatable because that's something that we already have. We're just saying now, extend it towards everybody equally.
So, 심지 탐정을 차고 깨고 그랬어. 라나, 디다 융초 왔어. 선발로 가지 라나. 이 말을 차고 깨고 유마을 두다.
So if you think, I'll have to cultivate attachment towards everybody, it seems doable because in any case, every day the amount of things that we have attachment to, they're constantly increasing. So you just increase them more.
So 심지 탐정을 닝지 곰고래라나 타는 부러지냐. 닝지 깨고래라나 아따야 쉬우지 샴바직 제고나 로지 식삼고 돼.
Whereas if you say you have to have compassion towards everyone, then it's like, okay, there's something that I have to do, I have to get there, there's some technique, some method, there's like a whole thing. It starts to seem very distant. Whereas you say, I just have to have attachment towards everyone, suddenly becomes something that you can immediately do.
So that 당부 깨셔더니 얘들 모두 살롱체인데 초보 총무 있는 융아요래 민호시험에 있는 융아요래 차고에서 융아도 다 되는 도도도도 다 제제 다 가족이 민망하 대화 차변 차고에서 유마로 도.
When one's young, you only have like a few people who are around you who you can have attachment towards because your immediate circle is so small. But as you get older and you interact with more people and you go and meet more people and you go to different places, your like circle of people that you know just constantly increases. It's getting always bigger.
그래서 다 디나시 다 단단한 저 착박게 대해서 간지질 착박게 위나다. 유심진 순저질 착박게 위나. 파마빈게 조고 간지질 착박게 위나. 디 착박 상막이 겹로될 가리요래. 달아 차비차바디. 달아 차고 손자 아니 디균이 다 수념도 대화 싸워지 차니 착박게 고주구도나 코념도 가 대화 간지신 차서. 간지신 콜 착박게 고주송 믹다다. 간다 당부 코념도 대화지샤. 코념도 대화지샤지 크기 유니 계란라 대화 체중 매바 대화 충지 간다 대화 첨부 체중 가리 매바는 계란라 간다 대화직도 라도지. 디 라도도 갈래 계란기 셈나라 라도다. 아, nga dewa dugi yore kola den dewa di chungsoas continue keep continue chakwa gen mut des tirta.
So right now, if you consider the way that you have attachment, not you, the way we have attachment towards others, is that the people that we have attachment to, or if it's someone else who I have attachment for, there is always an attachment towards myself that is the real motivating factor. Because if anyone tests who you find yourself feeling close to, or having a sense of fondness for, or having some attachment for, to use the word attachment consistently, it's always going to be someone who at some point, at some moment, has done something to make me happy. So if through them, is irrespective of the extent of happiness that they generated in me, whatever feeling of closeness or fondness or attachment that we have towards someone else, it's always going to come from them having generated or been the cause of my happiness. And so, because I wish to be happy and I wish to attain happiness, and they have acted as a medium or as a source for my happiness, I feel a feeling of closeness or attachment towards them. And then, as a result of this, I want to continue this relationship or cultivate it because it's a source of my personal well-being.
Taya music misawa chinyamdu dewa chene dewa chungay sabla dungen soro chungji experience dukjadu chungbayina ani yablo de yorwa nga dungen dugumindu sede dewa di yoba indi ani kwezani chungaydi sorwadi dugoji chungbayindi lapsa kola chakbake sabla ni kozan taring stese shedangsne gyabgi chungro.
So contrary or in an opposite manner, when a relationship is not one where it makes one happy, but the other person becomes a source of one's suffering or one's unhappiness, then the underlying or the overriding sensation is still, I wish to be happy, I do not want to be unhappy, I do not want to suffer. What I receive from this person is my suffering, and therefore it naturally leads to a feeling of wanting to distance or a sense of aversion, which is basically a wish to distance oneself or separate oneself from things that make one unhappy. So this is what is aversion. When we use the word aversion, that's just what it means, the wish to separate oneself from things that make us unhappy.
소소기 냠용 주조 소화될 시샤네 미셔바지 대화 지기도나 소소 워셔 참부지 코님 대화 지기도나 랍상 콜랍자기다 코님도 시에도 대화 마침마도 딘디 연구도다스.
And if someone who's made our life hard, we see our friends getting close to them, we immediately give them the advice saying, you know what, don't do this. This person's not great.
그래. 손선다 단다 뒤절랑 가족이 유일 착박게 뒤에 참아 착박게 뒤에 랑기관계 착박게 뒤에 툭사디 nga dewa de dunga mide ani nga sosogi dewa 중에 될 콜 dewa직 투소나 착박게 돼야 아니 소소기 dewa dunga dunga 메어서 dunga 되도 투가 잡소나 아니 콜 잡이 줘야 다디 nga줄 냠뇽이었다.
So far, everything that we do, or whatever kind of relations we maintain with people, they all have this underlying, they're all coming from the same place, which is, I wish to be happy, and I wish not to be unhappy. And if the person or the relationship is one that provides my happiness, then I want to cultivate it. If the relation doesn't provide my well-being or my happiness, I want to distance myself from them. And so this is something that we don't really need to think about. You know this. We all know that this is how we act. This is kind of, yeah, it's just our default setting. This is how we are.
Ta nawasangi tadu nanglo tela rikpo tes tangche. Ta kerang pajo chakbakese yutela khadu ge dewa do dunge dela samoma dans. Punyang ringbo ge dewa samoma dans. Punyang ringbo ge dunge samoma dans. So punyang ringbo ge dewa junge samoma tang waina ani changma zani kerang la dewa yungu yores. Khadu la kerang dewa jingye yung sigire dunge jingye yung sugires. Yena yutela dewa cheba yena pugi dewa samoma dans ta. Gyurungbo ge dewa, ta ringbo ge dewa do samoma tang waina kerang la yung de changma pagini yung gire se geje lebinde rangshingi chakbake doje. 딜랍디 심진 탐제를 쳐봐 개초사르다 다 심진 탐제를 심진 시행을 때네 랑로 푸기 되와 카두카두기 되와 섬로마다 맞지 푸기 되와 중단에도 시릭비지 툭투나 디 항시지냐 바이나 랑싱이 쳐봐 개
So, with this basic state that we all have, then in the teachings of the Buddha, there's like a, I guess it's like a hack or like a twist. And it's very interesting because the way the Buddha is explained in the text is they say, well, you know what? You see, you have attachment to people. Now, the attachment to people that you have is fine, but instead of being concerned with the immediate benefit that you get, think about the long-term benefits. So the goal now becomes not the immediate happiness that you derive, but a final goal of a much higher, much better state of happiness. And then the reasoning that is presented is presented to show how this ultimate or this final state of a much better form of happiness is attainable necessarily through each individual person that you meet. So now, instead of being a source for my immediate happiness, if you can understand the reasoning and you can gain certainty that every single person individually is a source of my happiness, where now my happiness is that final goal, then naturally you can also understand or start to conceive of how you can have attachment to everyone equally.
So 딘디기 푸기 되와 디 셴라 때네 중단데 릭비기 직 주발링이 신예바이나 이는 아주 달라인 차고 개
Which is why if you can reason it out and see how you can actually attain long-term benefit through each individual person, and this naturally leads to attachment arise, then you can start to conceive of how you can have attachment towards an enemy.
디인데 아니 심진 탐제를 차와게 용초고요 봐. 디인데 아니 닝제들라 슝기 나로로 착베 민tên 숭샤바든데 요 빼는 나로라 온도게 말이 뒤로 가서 가지고 데바트지기 시그널로 돌아 차고 군차서 파고토메 겸얘기세 직지요. 그래서 파고토메기 제와디 계제 시에인데 파고토메를 가리요르슬라나 돌아 차고 군차졌다. 돌아 탐제를 차비 차고디 요르스.
So because this kind of attachment is like it's firstly you can fathom it and it's attainable and it's doable, often you will find in the texts that instead of using compassion or instead of using love, they use the word attachment. For instance, in the commentary of Acharya Haribhadra's commentary to the Abhisama Alankar, when he praises Arya Sangha, he praises Arya Sangha by saying, you who have attachment to all sentient beings. So he actually uses the word attachment to say how it's the same thing as compassion or love, what we use the word great compassion or great love. He just replaces that word with attachment. And you find this repeated in the texts because it's fathomable, it's doable.
어디랬다? 당다 디시고다 디상마게 내가 토바도 능에 도와되게 되배원기 규규요래 디기 갑로델라 달아체베 낙차디요레스 어디 디송기요.
So that's what's being said over here. Whatever one does, whatever wish one has for happiness or whatever wish one has to be free from suffering, it's all preceded by or driven by, steered by this kind of attachment to oneself.
다 디젤의 취것이 땅바래. 다 대와 토바당 동에 토로되게 대배왕기 개발링기 여바이나 대배왕기 개발링기 요나 아니 가르치니 개와 두잘렘 바데스. 개와 두자 수지 되게 말와스 다 취거디 땅바래.
So then there's a question which is, well, if that's true, if what you say is true, then what you're saying is essentially that wherever you end up is because of attachment, and if you end up in a low status or in an unpleasant, inferior state, how does that result from attachment? Because no one wishes for, or no one wants or desires a low or unpleasant, inferior state.
딜라비엔디 교요 말레스 대와 토버드베다 동에 토로되베 요나야 아니 개와 독자련도에 같이 랭고라나 개와 독자디 독자이 뭐 마통하셔야지 대라 친주로 로게지 약부통시 되는 개와 독자이 임바지라 소소로기 친주로도 통하지 약부통하지 딘디 친주로 로디 로고치는 알레소 어디다.
So the answer to this is, it's not true that you cannot have attachment to inferior or unpleasant states, Because if this attachment to the self gets accompanied with another mistaken mind or a wrong perception that misperceives something that is actually unpleasant as pleasant, and this gets accompanied with attachment to the self, then you can get drawn or have attachment for things that actually make you suffer, because you have somehow not been able to see that that's their actual nature, and you have perceived them with an opposite quality, which is one of being content or leading to one's well-being and happiness.
Ta khala jila dugjilu an desha shabayina ta miji trogo toji khala de thong yende ine kwe dugye ba mashe bashin kwe khala de sagiru ba.
So if you take food and you mix poison in it and you leave it lying around, someone who's really hungry and starving, they'll come about, they won't see that it's poisoned food, and because they wanted to eat, they'll eat it.
Ta go dugsana ta kangye thegiru ba kangye theji shiru mengan lene an doctor dikisi geje tene kwe shinge trugu dweslana never de nga shinge trugu dus legru.
So if then this person can ingests this poison and then they start to get sick and they're on the verge of death, and you take them to the hospital and you put them in front of the doctor, and the doctor comes around and says, "Do you want to die?" The patient will probably say, "No, I don't want to die."
Kwe shinge trugu medu karjin di dugyu yu khala de sabins dugdi kajin sabins.
So if the doctor then turns around and says, "Well, if you don't want to die, why did you eat this poisoned food?"
Ko khalere nga dugyu ba shema sos.
The normal thing that the person will say is, "I didn't know that it was poisoned."
Tirta dewa de trogo toyagi dunge de seyada ani yagbe dewa digi khala de sachu ine khala de la tuyo ba di mathon mashe ba digi trochene sawarta.
So there's attachment to the self, attachment to one's happiness, attachment to be free from one's suffering. So suffering is your stomach is hungry, your stomach is hurting because you want to eat something. Your stomach feels empty, that's a form of suffering you want to get rid of. What you want to feel is the joy of having a full belly, a content stomach. So there is this attachment which has come now from the wish not to be suffering and the wish to be happy, which has come from attachment to self. And then when this is accompanied with not knowing the nature of that food, which is actually that it has poison, and not perceiving that, when this desire is accompanied with the mistaken view that doesn't identify things as actually a source of suffering, then these two things come together and you eat. And then that's how this happens.
Ta dina shin cheje dewa dugu yore dungin dugu yomare ine ta mil kokor dang yore mil tulse shege yore mil ta kanda shembala dungin kha te tudu lega dinga ju chegoro da ta chore dewane dugu mendo dewane dugu dungin dugu mendo ani kana di kajin chege yos laba ina taran ro di dungin gi yeme shema so se dirota sangi deba na dungin gi yeme ko tong mindus.
So people who mislead others, who fool others, who take advantage of others, who suppress, make other people endure enormous amounts of suffering. If you ask them, you say, "Well, you want to be happy, you don't want to suffer, why are you doing these things?" They'll say the same exact thing. They'll say, "I don't know, or I don't see what I'm doing to be a cause of suffering. I see that as something that's making me happy, it's for my benefit." And so, because certain things that are said, or what the Buddha has taught as a cause for suffering, we don't identify it as a cause for suffering, and we latch on to that thinking that it's actually going to make us happy.
Sonza tanganzo dungi gi gyul ma thong chi kola deoba theda ani chinjulo lo tini gi cheche do digi yoba yinde ani sangye gi khala gore ta nge lega khare sangye nge lega khare la nge lega di ta kera la udit ne interesta di devi gyu mari kera che di kera de bare do was so kera che di and devi gyu mari dungi gi gyure di la di nge lega resta lam te di nge lega res.
So when these two come together, which is desire accompanied with a wrong perception that sees something that has a nature of suffering, or that nature that causes suffering, and not seeing that as suffering. So when you have this wrong perception of not seeing suffering as suffering, but seeing it as a cause for happiness, accompanied with this desire, then you do all the things that we do that never make us happy. And so because this is the situation, when the Buddha looks at us, what the Buddha sees, or what the Buddha identifies as his role, is to tell us that what we're doing is not going to make us happy, because our understanding or our perception is seeing something that is actually the nature of suffering, and we're not seeing it to be the nature of suffering. So the job of the Buddha, or the role of the Buddha, is just to show us that what we're doing is actually a cause of suffering. That's what his job is, that's what he's there for.
So that 가장 아주 상기 좀 된데 껴버려서 라베 카도들 덴바시 된자바스 라이 된다 디스다.
So when we looked before in the beginning of the text where it said the Buddha is a protector because he taught the four truths, that's what it is. Teaching the four truths means doing this.
So the 가리 데비 규레, 가리 둥이 규레, 아니 데비 규디 디 데비 규레 라에디코 직접 깨져 마임바, 코랑게 데비 규임바, 둥이 규임바, 상마 무수 명체, 아니 데비 규디 라렌타니 코랑 대화 간데스 톱이메 차다 다 땡겨 여러분 다 디르다.
So when the Buddha taught these four truths, what the four truths are is, at the end of the day, these are the causes for happiness, these are the causes for suffering, but not just having understood them, but having identified them, practiced them, reached the result of these practices and experienced and fully realized them, and then passing them on, or then sharing them and transmitting them to others, is what it means to teach the four truths.
Ta di lamga dite dewa dewa dunge me du ngado sosolo yoba che ane sangye gi di dewi gyure me dunge resha di dunge gi keran che de dewi gyuma dunge gi gyure se lam di nenga nilu di ten ne ta mashe ge bado soso rangi ten ni soso rangi nyeba manye ge bado lalin ke du mare ijisin robe na tharum bishara ro tu mare ta soso le nyeba manye ya mathong che ya ko tes thong ba yina ya soso dadung digala
So once the Buddha has done all of this and he's shown that to us, and we on our own end, we want to naturally, without any effort, we all naturally want to be happy and not suffer. If then, after having heard what the Buddha has said, if we are not sure of what the Buddha said because we're not really investigating what he says, if we just rely on it because we believe him or we have faith in the Buddha, one doesn't really get very far. There's not enough, it's not stimulating enough to take you very far. You find yourself, one's abilities are heavily compromised. Simultaneously, if you see a little bit of it and you have a slight experience of it, but you kind of don't pay heed to it, or you find it secondary and not particularly relevant, there's nothing more that the Buddha can do. If these are the two attitudes or these are the reactions that we have, the Buddha's role is done. There's nothing more that the Buddha can do at that point.
Sangye kirangi lam temba di nge shen sons, nge tong sons, nge ko sons. Ine nga di dewi gyuma di dungi gi gyure lai di nga kaya gi deva mendus. Di nga mutun che duguins. Ine nga ran dewa dugi du ta kiranchik che roches, chilam na roches, laba ina. Ta chilam na kaya yo mar sangye la. Ta nga zo mang che wa chilab shu de di odin de suru jo ta. Sangye gi di ma che, dewa dugi du na di ma che, dungi dugu mindu na di ma che, se di nga mutun che gins. Dewa dugi du na di che go res na, nga di che dugu mindus. Ine ta still ya sangye la melam gyab che. Nima rizhishin melam gyab che, nga kibu yung wa sho, nga jik che wa sho, kyo rogwa che ro, jik che ro sho. Nga zo mang che melam gyab de dir ta.
So, as an attitude, if the attitude is, I've understood what you're saying are the causes for happiness, I've understood what you're saying are the causes for suffering, but I can't do it. I can't give up the things that I do, even though you might say that they're causes for suffering. And the things that you're telling me to do, which are the causes for happiness, those are too hard for me to do. So I won't be able to do it, but please you bless me to do it. And then if you make supplications or prayers, there's no blessing, like there's nothing can come from the Buddha, there's nothing that can come down to you. So most of our supplications are more or less like that. Like we have this, all the prayers that we do and all of the recitations that we do and all of the supplications that we do to the Buddhas are kind of like that, where the Buddha is saying, don't do this, because if you want to be happy, these are the causes for happiness, these are the causes for suffering. Abstain from these and cultivate these. The Buddha has said that, we've heard it, but deep down inside we're like, you know what, I really can't. So the things that I should be doing, can't do it. the things that I shouldn't be doing, I'm happy doing them, I'm familiar with it, but I still want to be happy. I still have faith in the Buddha. Please bless me. And then you make a whole host of supplications. It doesn't work. It can't work.
손자다 미망볼로 고고로 땅되게 미망볼로 tulsi 제되게 우유 고사로선 제되게 이내 니마다고 사간도 쇼게 나가도 땡 쳐베지베 땡 슬벨업 저거로 또는 거리자고 나 지에디 계란 남같은 셔주든 나 지기면서 왕자 나랑 가르치고 지기 있어 이내야 양좀 별로 자도 거로 쳐베지베 땡 슬라이더 가르치고
So you mislead people, you lie to people, you get upset with people, you do all sorts of, a whole host of unwholesome, completely harmful things. But then every morning you go to the temple, you ring the bell, you light a lamp, and you make a prayer. What are you praying for? Essentially what you're saying is, look, I've understood everything you're telling me, I can't do that, but I'm still here, I'm still doing my prayer, I'm still lighting the thing, now bless me for something. But what are you praying for? You're not doing what they're saying. That's not something you are able to do. But this still happens. People keep going every day, and they ring the bell and they light the lamp every single day. And you see many people like this. It's very common. And if we find ourselves veering in that direction, it's equally precarious for us. So we have to ensure that we don't get into that attitude.
Nagridas lap pugudi naik dego mare ina di masa lagi pugudi saga chemba ina phama di dinglu tsewa yoba chila chilo namju ti stokbos deche di saga chedangi ke tarbos tro number deche.
So there is a kind of one alternative, which is, for instance, if parents see that a child should not eat something because it's going to be extremely harmful to them, and they've told the child not to eat, but the child then they see that they're still doing it, with enormous love or concern for the child inside, the way they come out or the way it manifests is in this kind of wrathful way where they're like, try it. And so with that threatening attitude, the expression is one that might seem wrathful, but it's preceded by the sense of concern and love.
shiwa shiwu ju yorde, tsewa shiwu ju yorde, ta lam ten, di cheba yida, tadung nga zu manyin che, ulda se korwa, tak, di che di de, ani sangi choy namba ten che. Tada nga zu yidam chow se yada, jik, shoyong chow de namba ten de, es chow namba ru ten che. Ani da, tsam tsam la, ani nga zu la, di pamegi nyeda tang na shi che che. 내가 도저히 가시는 결을 디부직 마되는 용금민도 세자 아니 내 나사 드니 신앙사고 드니 나에게 낀체제 간다 드니 슈겐테드니 용초고 상객치래.
Similarly, if the Buddha is sitting in a state of complete realization and the Buddha is in a state of complete peace, but because the activity that the Buddha does is one of transmitting that to us, if we have that attitude of someone who just keeps doing the wrong thing or just keeps doing the opposite thing, at that point, much like the parents manifest this form of, like that they behave in a wrathful way, the Buddhas arise in these wrathful manifestations, which are all of these hosts of the wrathful deities or all the protectors in that wrathful aspect. And the way in which that activity of the Buddha then can manifest is where these deities or these wrathful aspects of the Buddha, they are looking at us and saying, you're not going to get it. You're being stubborn about it. So by inducing all sorts of obstacles or difficulties to make these moments of clarity arise and to change our behavior, sometimes the activities of the Buddhas can also manifest in these ways, in these wrathful aspects or in these ways where we feel and experience a whole host of problems.
So zangar kadambe master lama junzegi namtha dendena di yorta. So zang hop dende nyamnen che de de khadule kenge nasa ro kenge lubu wa do jig nasa shina ro de chungba yina otang mu yidam gi ngudup tesong sang de yidam gi ngudup tesong senge dende yorta kadambe lama.
So there are, in the biographies of the Kadampa masters in Tibet, you often find mention that when they were practicing or they were involved in extensive periods of practice, then whenever they felt sick or they had a lot of obstacles to their life, they immediately recognized those or identified those as the blessings of the deities. There's another story of one of the students of one of these masters who, in the middle of a large gathering, got scolded, got like really strongly reprimanded by the teacher. But then when he came back later, he was thrilled, he was overjoyed, because he's like, in the middle of everyone, I was the one who received, like with all these people there, I am the one who received the Guru's blessings. So he was overjoyed that this happened. But now you try and pull a stunt like that, and they'll take you straight to jail.
So that they were doing me do ina ni kewa duja karjin len res la na o chinji log lodi ke ni duja lo duja yin ba thong ma to wa nye song gi phungbu dungi ge rang shin do thong me do ya phungbu dugding ge rang shin do thong ma to chinji log lo di ro kwa chene an nga samjur che do yores.
So why have we taken an inferior birth, or why have we taken a birth where it is a cause for suffering, not identifying it as a cause for suffering? So with the wrong perception of not identifying suffering as suffering, accompanied with desire, which is coming from this attachment to self, when these two things come together, that's why we take a inferior or a low status.
Dewa thomde do dungye thomde gi seba dungye la dewar thomde ngi chinju lo nibo di ani nga ju kyawa chiman to ninsam jure gi gyuso teresta gyu kuni changso nan gyuso pas.
So the desire that is coming from wishing to be happy and the desire that is coming from not wishing to suffer, so this desire that has these two, and the desire that wishes for something without understanding its nature as suffering and seeing it as a cause for happiness, when these two come together, these are the causes, this is the collection of causes that then is the reason why the mind then takes on a new birth.
That subject Quran
So in the outline where it says explanation of how an ordinary being has all the causes to connect, so all the causes here refers to these two.
So that
which is why also in the root verse it says wrong perception of suffering and tightly bound desire are causes of birth. For one, without them there will be no birth. So if you don't have these two, which is this desire and this wrong perception of suffering, then you are free from suffering, you're free from birth.
So that did signal di nanglola, sung shabati, nam yung anjugi, tak under langdur chenandi, chazan ko dinang tingi yorta.
So in just these 4 lines, which is the single verse, the entire path of what one should do and what leads to happiness and what doesn't, and therefore if one wishes for these, what one should do, is all explained in these 4 lines.
So that pena so mize nyamnyu na lo la ngadu lega mangu cheba inde lega nundu mangu shogu duwa lega nundu mangu shoje an kangye yungu duwa kangye chego ro da so mize na dini yungu ro ba so that ngaran la ndi nyamnyu mangu yor ba lega nundu showa digi kembe kangye chedia dini yungu ro so that dini yungu be khadu de la zawa di kyorgu yorda ngunishin zawa di lo la semji di kyortuna shiraya gorda dili ka dunge di chunga khadu la ada dunge di 중에 디 샴발라 파 야람마 좀 버치제 다가르스다 나란 대화도 등에 메데어서 나 제가 유인 봤어 엔 디디 모빈에서 시기메 왔어 통마송왔어 딱 분이냠도 소이 지에 메레스다 디부 다가랑 레스다 슝나마 송만이 다가랑 문에 레도 세기 수수기 고와디 레버이나 and same ya that deal matter but mutin de 강에 체대 레도 세디 아니 디기 ken치 아 코와 동행이랑 실에서 오늘 레도 세디 코와 레라 시라기 편도 다디.
So when we normally do stuff, we also experience oftentimes that the things that we do don't really lead to what we want or what we expect. And because they don't, we make mistakes, and so we can identify the mistakes that we make. What I often do, or I find myself happening, is that when I find myself making these mistakes, I remember this verse. So I have it memorized, and it might be helpful also to memorize it, because when you recite this or you remember this verse, when you make a mistake, then it's very easy to understand what happened, because at that point you can immediately identify that I started out with a wish to be happy and wanting to be happy and not suffer, but not having identified correctly what makes me happy and what actions lead to suffering. I have made this mistake. So as long as I have this craving or this desire, and I have this misperception of what really makes me happy or what the causes of happiness are, as long as I don't understand the nature of samsara, and as long as I don't understand the means to get out of it, and I have these two minds, this will keep happening. So I'll keep making the same mistake, and when these two come together, it's inevitable that the outcome will be one of suffering. So remembering this verse and bringing it to mind is very effective in those moments which are frequent when we make mistakes, just by remembering this, because then we know that the error is our own, and we can't really point blame or fingers to outside people or situations outside saying, you are the source for my unhappiness.
당아주 지단게 내가 셴바 지딩이 내가 셴바인데 갈라 디체바이나 카가스키 제마 야부 용도 뭐용 또 승아주 쳬바체디 요르다 쳬바가로 제 요르다 봐 지금 내가 지금 ben에 사면 담나 단에 변도 야구 용 달로 총 야구 용 남시든 건다 근데 가리는 또 승아주 쳬바체 요르바 이는 아주 미념도 릴레이션십 써야지 미념도 제와 써야 될라 대화도 동의 미디블로디 요여바체 이내 파주 미디기 시가디 심규강로 요바인데 미기 심규도 가서 통토고 매바인데 코여강로 knowledge zero 가서 zero.
Often most things that we do, like ordinary actions, you can kind of gauge or know what kind of results will come about. Like ordinary things like seeds and planting and constructing, cooking, stuff like that. But when you're talking about personal relationships with other people, because what you are actually engaging in is their mind or their character, and what one thinks and what someone else is thinking, or what their thoughts are, what their personality is hidden to us. It's not known to us. Actually, when we're engaging with someone else, we have zero knowledge of what they really are like.
당복 응연들라 거기 심규통마도 가져는 미시비 뭔가 직체 디가라 미수도 수임바이네 미사와 토윤디 저방에바데 저바 상가 등을 시가디 상말이었다.
So the qualities that they have are completely hidden to us, and so we don't know them. So we have the ignorance of not being able to see what their qualities are. On top of that, we also all have individually the quality of hiding our faults when we meet someone and putting on a facade of all the good things that we are. So we portray ourselves as a lot better than what we are instantly. This is also something that we all have.
So the 디인디다 그게 나로기 좁은 예바 기시 여바이나 여바디 가디 튕겨리스는 심리 유령 무도나 모두 튕겨 말해.
So whether they have these negative qualities or they have kind of these character flaws or harmful thoughts is not something you'll ever find out right away. It's something that happens with repeated familiarization or repeated contact, I think, with that person.
디인디 갈라다 저와치베 카둘라 소소규라 탄도 둥이 융에게 대화대화 둥이메도 불렀지 옹바디 여바인디 갈라 아니 파경원에다 타직 대화 융다 모양세디 예미 임바세 당보 릴레이션십 수두고라네 수술려나 타dik di kowa di yona thadi dili girta.
So, like it says in the verse, if you know that you're coming from a space of wanting to be happy and not wanting suffering, and you also know that you are coming with an attitude or an idea which is completely hidden, so you're coming in blind, you have no idea of how they are, so you're unaware of the situation, and you're coming with this drive into any given situation. If you enter any relationship with this idea or with this understanding that this is the drive that you have, and that this is the reality of the situation where I have no idea how this is going to play out or how this is going to pan out, then you approach all relationships with this. You're prepared on both fronts. You know that this is where you're coming from, and you know how to approach it in a more kind of pragmatic way.
다 디간을 릭직 삼로 로자 충분히 되게 다 쳬바간이 셔라셔라 쳬바 두고 매바직체 이내에 삼로 나오는 다 쉬우쉬우 레와 충분히 맞아버치지 다 코님도 레와 수여진 알아 디우서 레와 충분히 수기 레와도 셔라 맞아버치 텔레파 도도 수주 로제도 체스체제 내가 두스 모든 레와 친두스 대바이나 니용은 콜라 펜도 체도에 망고도 샵지슈도에 망고도 식 콜라 펜도 죽도에 되는데 두 세제 추게제 마셔지 파디체 삼로디 슈충보 요딩이 릭직 미지 요르고다.
Then there are also some people who have like a very kind of, I guess, courageous, or not really courageous, but like they have a very, I'm not getting the word. Yeah, they have like, yeah, they have like a kind of more vast attitude, or they have a more, I guess, open attitude or more vast way of thinking about it. And so they approach the relationship not so much being aware that this is still the situation where they don't know the reality of the other person, of the situation, while being driven by desire. When they approach someone, the approach is not motivated by how much they can receive from that other person and how much the other person can do for them. And so they keep their own kind of, they keep their distance on this front where they're not approaching the relationship because it's extremely beneficial for them, while at the same time they have an opposite reaction or an opposite attitude of saying, there's many things that I can do for the other person. So they approach all relationships not so much with a concern for what the other person can do for them, but more with an idea of what we can do or what I can do for the other person. Then there's this way also to approach relationships which such people have. There are people like this.
So 그런 미게 단데 다 처벌이 이미 하면보다 간다 낭바들래 뭐시 붙이요. 그래서 그런 이미지 가지고 딱 많이 계제시도 스테디. 그런 두두신 미치니 뭐시 붙여서 뭐시 붙여도 뭐 보모디 수 대화 수치로 제인데 이게 그런 당보 딜라인스 가릴라서 영원히 결혼을 제투에 디디디디모도 메다스는 당보 라와이스. 인케랑 나님 대화시라 마진 얘기를 해서 영원 시라 제동 말을 지켜랑 나가서 날라 디게스게 에빌리티 메스 가리가리 요참을 라인사 배야 볼레니 그냥 섬당나 야부 쉬우지래.
So I have a friend who Miguel, who's a lay person. He's Buddhist, but I don't know how much of a practitioner he is. But one day when we were talking, he said there was this lady who I had this relation with, and as we got more familiar with each other, I saw that she was getting always closer and closer to me. But I told her straight off, I said, look, there's only so much I can do for you. This is what I have. This is what I'm able to do. This is all I can do for you. Therefore, I suggest that you don't interact or you don't maintain this relation with me because this is all I've got. I've got nothing more. And so I said, that's really good. That's a great way to think about it.
영원히 파가지고 제투 그랬어. 네 사무들이 잡을 망치야지기 파견이 수 가져라 그랬어. 네 사무단 대화체가 좀 강해 되고 왔다.
So instead of approaching things with what I can do for them, our natural attitude is what can I get from them, and then with this attitude naturally then a whole bunch of problems arise.